Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that you actually have the option to either be a sugar burner or a fat burner? It's called having a metabolic advantage, as Dr. Ben Beekman would put it. You can actually burn your own stored body fat for fuel. On this show, we talk about ketogenesis, fasting, biohacking, all with the goal of optimal body composition for longevity and having the highest possible quality of life. I hope you enjoy these interviews and solo casts that I present to you, all with this goal in mind. Hey guys, welcome back to Fast Keto. I am so excited to have Dr. Stephen Hussey joining us today. He is a doctor who's written 2 books on health, The Health Evolution, Why Understanding Evolution is Key to Vibrant Health, and a book called The Heart, Our Most Medically Misunderstood Organ. Dr. Hussey guides online coaching clients from all around the world, and he uses the latest research and health-attaining strategies. I loved having him on the episode today because we particularly focused in on the heart and how much the heart loves ketones. We talked all about some really interesting theories that he has about oxidative stress and toxins, including plant toxins, and burning carbohydrates, which depletes nitric oxide, and how this is essential for preventing heart attacks. So keto can really be supportive of heart health, and it was really great to have Dr. Hussey on the podcast today. I think you guys will really enjoy all the information that he has to share, and I hope you guys get to share this episode with someone that you think might like to learn more about heart health, preventing heart disease, and how keto can be really beneficial and supportive for heart health. Hope you guys enjoy today's interview and episode with Dr. Stephen Hussey. All right, guys. Now, I know you're like me. You love to budget and save money, but also feed your families the most high quality, delicious tasting food that is super nutrient dense. Now, that's why I love ButcherBox. They make all of this super affordable by taking out the middleman, grocery stores, and being able to purchase directly from a collective of ranches. This way, we support buying high quality grass-fed and finished beef, free-range organic chicken that's free of antibiotics, heritage breed pork, wild-caught Alaskan sockeye salmon, all of this so affordably by being able to buy directly from the ranchers and fishermen. Now, ButcherBox is offering a very special deal for listeners of Fast Keto. If you go to butcherbox.com/fastketo, new members can receive 2 pounds of ground beef, 2 pounds of bacon for free, plus $20 off your first box just by going to butcherbox.com/fastketo. That's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Try them out. I absolutely love what they do and how affordable they make it to have grass-fed, grass-finished beef and such high-quality foods shipped directly to your door, saving time and money from having to go to the grocery store, and just being able to provide really high quality, nutrient dense food for our families. So that's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Let me know if you try them out. They provide absolutely delicious meat. I love receiving my box every month, and I know that you will too. Welcome, Dr. Hussey. Thank you so much for being here with us today on Fast Keto.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Now, you have a very interesting theory about heart disease and basically the heart. So let's talk about the heart and what interests you about it.
Well, I'll kind of start with, what got me interested in it. So I'm a chiropractor and I have a master's degree in functional medicine. But I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 9. And I had a lot of inflammatory conditions when I was a kid. But I've gotten rid of most of those aside from the type 1 diabetes. And I remember as a kid, in the doctor's offices, seeing all these educational posters that say, diabetics have increased risk for heart disease like 2 to 4 times, and you have all these vascular issues and all that kind of stuff. At least when I asked the doctor why that was, they said, oh, it's because of vascular damage. And so throughout my, health education and my medical education and my master's degree, and then even my own research, I really just try to figure out what causes heart disease and how I can prevent it, because I'm supposedly at this increased risk for it. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings about the heart and heart disease. And my ebook is actually called Our Most Medically Misunderstood Organ. Um, but I think more than anything, it's the idea that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease, but that's really, and even a heart attack. I mean, that's really just one little aspect of what I've uncovered about the heart. But it's the one that's everybody wants to hear about, because we all hear every single day that saturated fat and cholesterol in our diet, or at least we're recommended that by government bodies and things, that it causes heart attacks and heart disease. And I've just uncovered a lot of things that tell me that that's simply not true. But then I was really wondering what does cause a heart attack. So I've really dedicated, most of my adult life to figuring out these things and using my medical background to dig into the research and really figure out what does cause this disease.
That's awesome. And do you think that keto gives you kind of a unique perspective on it?
Yeah. So a while back, a long while back, you find out that our organs, um, most all of them, but especially the heart and the brain, really prefer to burn ketones, and they're much more efficient when they do. And most of our cells and our tissues in our body are more efficient when they burn ketones, or when they burn fat and ketones, because we're just making less exhaust, I call it, which is just the byproduct of what happens when we burn any kind of energy. We make less of that stuff, less free radicals. But also we're just more efficient. We make more molecules of ATP burning fatty acids and ketones than we would if we were burning carbohydrates. And to me, it turns out that I think that it's very, very important for the heart to be burning ketones and fatty acids. And it's always burning a combination of carbohydrates and fatty acids, but predominantly burning fatty acids. And I actually think that the body has these built-in mechanisms that make sure that the heart is going to be the last thing to have to resort to burning predominantly carbohydrates. And those are, one, if we look at some of the metabolism, or the digestion of the fats that we eat, it gets packaged into, like in the gut, it gets packaged into chylomicrons, and those chylomicrons are taken up into the lymphatic system, which is kind of like our drainage system. It's where our lymph fluid is flowing through. But that system drains directly into the veins that lead directly into the heart. So the inferior and superior vena cava that go directly into the heart, our main veins that go in there, the chylomicrons get dumped right into there. So then they still have to go through the lungs, and then they come back to the heart, but then they go immediately to the heart tissue. So it's almost like the body's giving that preference of burning those fatty acids to the heart. And then secondly, I found this study maybe 3-4 months ago that shows that heart cells have a signaling pathway that allows them to communicate directly to fat cells. And the researchers were all excited because they were like, well, if we could somehow, alter this signaling pathway in the heart, we could influence obesity. But for me, it's telling me that the heart has a direct signaling mechanism to the fat cells, so that if it's only got carbohydrates available and it needs more fat, it can tell those fat cells to mobilize fat for them to burn. Um, and so I think that the heart has these built-in mechanisms to just make sure that it's the last thing to have to burn carbohydrates given the situation. And I think that's um, uh, it's built as like a defense mechanism, because when the heart is forced to burn predominantly carbohydrates, bad things happen. And that's if you want to get into that now, like we can go into like what I think causes a heart attack, and being burning ketones and fatty acids or not plays a big role into that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, as we've traditionally been informed that the brain and heart need glucose and prefer glucose. And yet we know that ketones are this incredible alternative fuel that's kind of built into our physiology. And it's very interesting to consider which those organs would prefer.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that it's almost like I like to approach things from an evolutionary standpoint, and I think that we are incredible in the sense that we can go back and forth between burning either. But I do think that when we look at being in ketosis or a ketogenic state, we definitely have advantages to that. And so I think that we evolved, primarily eating fat, or we evolved what we are today because we ate a lot of animal fats and things, but we still have the ability to burn carbohydrates because there were times when that wasn't available. And that's an incredible adaptation to allow for survival. And it ultimately really led us to being able to create civilization and then actually be totally reliant on carbohydrates eventually, which most people are today. And so it allowed us to create civilization and have a massive um, growth of our species and allow us to become one of the most successful quote unquote species on the earth. This adaptation to go between carbohydrate and fat burning, but we are definitely more efficient. And I see how the health effects that it has when you teach your body to burn fat again. I see it in my clients. I see it all over social media. I see it just all the time. And so to me, there's no question that we are much more adapted to burning fatty acids and ketones, and we have this amazing ability to go back and forth. But when you lose that ability, you're setting yourself up for um, all the kinds of issues that come with running on carbohydrates. And to me, the fact that we get all these issues is just evidence that carbohydrates are almost like a slow form of poison. Too many of them for too long of a time can definitely cause issues because we don't see those issues when we teach our body to burn fat. We rely on that.
And do you differentiate between different types of carbohydrates?
Yeah, but there's like man-made carbohydrates that I don't think are really food at all. So we're talking about like processed sugar, high fructose corn syrup, those types of things, and those are the worst ones. And like I said, I don't really consider those a food. But then we have like more, I guess you would call them starchy or more slowly digested carbohydrates, like you would find in sweet potato or vegetables and things like that. And those are in a sense less toxic to us, but they're still going to take you out of ketosis. So if your goal is to get the benefits of a ketogenic diet, then you can't have too many of those to keep taking you out of ketosis, because then you're really not getting the long-term benefits of that. And especially if you're especially for your heart and your brain. Like if you're trying to get long-term benefits from ketosis in your heart and your brain, you've really got to stick with it and make sure you're not having enough carbohydrates to kick you out of ketosis, especially on a constant basis. Like every day or so, we don't want to be having enough to kick us out of ketosis.
So, what, in your opinion, is the best way to create really healthy, high performing hearts?
Yeah. So my recommendations stem from what I found causes a heart attack. And this may end up being a super long answer, but so my I'll get to the recommendations kind of when I explain this background stuff. So I found the research of this guy named Giorgio Beraldi, who was an Italian guy, worked at University of Milan for his career, and he studied the heart for his whole career. And he would do these autopsies of hearts, and he would find people who had died of heart disease, people who hadn't died of heart disease. He just studied all these different hearts. But what he would do is he would take a plastic material, inject it into the arteries of the heart, kind of like you see it if you've been to those Body World exhibits, and they do really interesting dissections, and they've actually like mapped out the different arterial systems of different animals and parts of humans and things like that. Well, he did that with the heart, so he injected this plastic material into the arteries, and then he dissolved away the rest of the tissue once the plastic material hardened, and he had a perfect cast of the arterial system of the heart. And what he found was that in 50% of, or at least in one study, when he was looking at blockages, in 50% of the hearts that he made the cast of, there was, these are people who died of heart attacks. There was no blockage whatsoever. There was no stenosis, which is just narrowing of a coronary artery, and there was no like sign of an acute, plaque formation that caused the blockage. in 50% of people. And so the other 50, there was a sign of a blockage, but it was one of those like acute plaque formations, like a rupture happened and a plaque formation. Well, what's thought is a rupture happens and a plaque formation forms. But he found that there was evidence in 93% of that 50% that the clot was the result of the heart attack and not the cause of it. So basically, it happened after the heart attack started. So if you do the math, he found then that 96.5% in this study that he did of heart attack victims had no clot or plaque that actually caused the heart attack, which is what we're told. You have a blockage, it restricts blood flow to an area, and we get tissue death um, because of the lack of blood flow. And so that was really striking to me. And I was thinking, so what does cause a heart attack? And Baraldi has had his theories, and I've done a lot of other looking. And so what I found is that a heart attack, in my opinion, is caused by three things. And so these three things are what I tell people to be working on as far as how to prevent heart disease. And so that is not being fat adapted, or losing the ability to burn fat for fuel so bad that your heart actually is forced to kind of burn carbohydrates. But it's a very specific series of events that has to happen for it to predominantly burn carbohydrates. The second one is oxidative stress, which basically just means, I was talking about how when your body burns energy, you end up making this exhaust, quote unquote, this waste product every time you burn energy. And so that, if we have too much of that, or we have too much toxin exposure, those things can lead to what's called oxidative stress. And so we have too many of these molecules in our body running around that cause tissue damage and deplete our body of antioxidants and things like that. And then the third one is an imbalance in our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system is basically the part of our nervous system that's interpreting our environment and telling your body if it's a safe or threatening environment. And so when we get an imbalance in that nervous system, we end up interpreting our environment as unsafe too often, even when it's completely safe, and, it has a lot to do with, our higher level thinking and our ability to, think our way into a stress response, even though we're not in danger, we're not having a life-threatening situation. We can have low levels of unnatural stressors that come with modern day society that can get us stuck in the stress response. So those three things: not being fat adapted, having high oxidative stress, and an imbalanced stress response are the three things that I think people need to rebalance to avoid a heart attack. And I'll kind of before we get into like how to do that, I'll get into what actually does cause it, like the series of events that causes a heart attack. So take those three imbalances, and what we see is that if someone's living, a high stress life, we're all dependent on making this one thing called money, and we have to kind of go out of our way to do it, and it can be very stressful because if you don't have enough, you can't get the resources you need to survive, which is kind of a stressful thing. But we're also surrounded by all these uh, unnatural noises within civilization, and unnatural things. And so this can create this low level stress response that we're having all day long. And so we never really get out of that fight or flight mode. We're in that kind of a low level fight or flight mode. And then the second thing is what the average American is relying on carbohydrates for fuel ever since the industrial or the agricultural revolution. We've been, farming high carbohydrate foods and been very reliant on those. And so much so that many people have even, lost the ability to burn fatty acids or ketones. And when you keto adapt, you kind of have to reteach yourself to do that. And then the amount of toxins that we're exposed to, and relying on those carbohydrates for fuel and burning carbohydrates is going to result in this high oxidative stress. So you combine those things together. So we get, let's say someone's living that lifestyle, that high stress lifestyle, they're relying on carbohydrates, they're exposed to a lot of toxins. And what happens is they go through a stressful event. And, the research shows us that heart attacks are more prevalent on very stressful days of the year. There was a study in Europe done where it said that the higher rates of heart attacks were on stressful holidays. Christmas Eve was number one. And then I think summer holiday, what they call summer holiday over there, was number two. And then Mondays, there were heart attacks were way more prevalent. So you have these three imbalances, and then you have this stressful event. And this stressful event does a few things. One, it creates a surge in sympathetic or fight or flight signaling, from your brain to your organs through the vagus nerve. And so that's basically what your body's supposed to do. Your body thinks it's in a threatening situation, so it sends this message to say, hey, we need to get away from this threat. Now, the problem with that is when we have this situation of these three imbalances, is that when the heart gets that signal to have this sympathetic response, it's always supposed to have the non-stress signal as well to balance it out. But the thing that relays or allows that non-stress signal to get into the heart is nitric oxide. And when we have high oxidative stress, we're damaging the lining of the arteries, which is where nitric oxide is made. And nitric oxide can also be used to neutralize some of those, exhaust or free radicals that are created with oxidative stress. So if we've depleted that nitric oxide through this oxidative stress from burning carbohydrates and damage to the lining of our blood vessels, then that non-stress state can't get into the heart cells to balance out that stressful signal that we just got from this stressful event. And the problem with that is that when you get that stress signal, your body reverts to burning carbohydrates because those are easier and quicker to burn. Maybe not the best in the long run as far as efficiency, but they're easier and quicker to burn because we need to get away from that threat. Your body thinks it needs to get away from this stressful situation by running away or fighting it off. So the problem with that is that when you start burning carbohydrates, like predominantly carbohydrates, when you switch over to that in the heart, we get a buildup of lactic acid. And we see the same thing happen in muscle cells. Like when you go for a run, your body starts burning the glycogen stored in those muscle cells, and we get lactic acid buildup, which is that muscle burn you feel when you're working out. However, when you're on the run, you can just stop if it gets too bad and the lactic acid gets pumped out. But the heart can't stop. So if we go through this series of events that causes it to burn carbohydrates and we get a buildup of lactic acid in the heart, it can't just stop beating. And so we end up getting this chest pain, which we know as angina, which is that lactic acid burn in the heart. And the problem with that is that we get this lactic acid buildup and we get this swelling of a certain area of the heart, a certain area of tissue in the heart. And that swelling actually changes the pressure. So usually the pressure is higher coming from the arteries into the tissues of the heart, so the blood can go into the tissues. But when we get this swelling, there's increased pressure there. And so what happens is that it changes the pressure gradient. And now the blood can't get into the tissues of the heart cells. And when the blood can't get in there, we see tissue death. And so that's kind of the series of events. Now, if that area is significant enough, then it can actually be fatal because it causes enough tissue death of the heart. And so proof to me that the change in pressure is what's causing the heart attack, is that we see almost 100% of heart attacks happen in the left ventricle, which is under the most pressure. So it's more susceptible to any type of pressure change than the right ventricle is. So it's just more likely to have that tissue death. And then also, I've seen lots of information showing that there's when you increase pacing of the heart and you put stress on the heart, there is a change in metabolism, a change in lactate metabolism, and when you supply it with nitric oxide, that change goes back. That change in metabolism goes back. That lactic acid metabolism goes back. And so the last piece of this is, remember, Beraldi found that that 93% of the 50% that did have a blockage or a plaque formation, there was evidence that it happened after the heart attack happened. He found that pressure that was created actually dislodged any atherosclerotic buildup that had already formed, and so it just made the situation worse. But the heart attack happened, caused the change in pressure, and then it dislodged those things, which is why it happened after the heart attack happened. So that's to me what causes a heart attack. And I found lots of different pieces of research that show the different aspects of all that. But to me, it's just absolutely fascinating that heart attacks, just like I believe anything else going wrong with the body, whether it's diabetes, whether it's cancer, is a change in metabolism, an altered metabolism. And so it's really interesting that we don't see heart cancer. Um, and to me, that's because the heart has these built-in mechanisms to make sure that it's predominantly burning fatty acids. And whenever, you know, any other tissue in the body, if it has to revert to burning glucose, it changes the metabolism. If it does that long enough and hard enough, it can result in cancer. And that's kind of the work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried. But when that happens in the heart, the change in metabolism is not around long enough to cause something like cancer because it results in a heart attack. So it's just there's no chance for the heart to develop cancer. So yeah,
Isn't that fascinating? I never really thought about the heart not ever developing cancer. You hear heart disease, but not heart cancer.
right, yeah,
That's a really, really interesting theory. And I think it's such an exciting time to just be working in this field with so much information and science coming out about ketones all the time. We keep learning new things about them, how they're signaling molecules, they have all these different properties, and they actually behave and communicate in many ways similarly to hormones. And it's just so fascinating to see all of this research coming out all the time that's really, shifting our theories and approaches to all of this.
yeah. It's really interesting because I'll come across research all the time because I'm just trying to piece together aspects of this and either prove or disprove what I'm thinking. But I mean, I see the results with clients I work with, so it's proof enough for me. But um, I came across some research that showed that after someone had a heart attack, what they would do is um, they would give them some drug. I can't remember the name of the drug, but that it would basically take away their body's ability to use glucose, or the heart's ability to use glucose. And what they found is that when they did that, the recovery from the heart attack, like the amount of recovery they got, the amount of tissue repair they got was decreased. And so at first I was like, well, why would that be? Like, like the heart likes to burn fat. So if you take away glucose, why would the recovery be worse? And then I remembered that this person had a heart attack. And so basically that means that they were very poorly fat adapted. And so, all of us in the ketogenic community who have gotten into ketosis know there's an adaptation phase. And so if this person is not adapted and you take away the one fuel that they are using, which is glucose, then of course they're not going to get recovery because they can't use ketones effectively right now either. Um, and so and I don't recommend trying to fat adapt after you've had a heart attack, but that just it made sense to me that it was more proof to me that this people who are deprived of their glucose in their heart cells got less recovery from it because that's the only fuel they know how to use. And if you have no fuel, then you're not going to recover or rebuild anything. So I'm coming across things like that all the time. So it's kind of exciting.
It's really, really fascinating. Now, how did you first come across this information? I know your personal health history, but how did you first find keto and what did you think of it at first?
Well, being type 1 diabetic, the first time I ever came across it was probably Dr. Bernstein. You know who that is?
Yes, I have heard of him, and actually most of the friends that I have who are diabetic hear of it and come across it through him.
Yeah, yeah. So that was way back before I even had a medical education. I read his book, so it didn't mean as much to me then as it does now. And I don't even think he calls his plan a ketogenic diet. I'm not sure. He's had different editions of his book come out, um, and I read one maybe 10, 12 years ago, and but it definitely is. It's definitely puts you in ketosis, which makes sense to me now. How my blood sugars are just super easy to control when I'm not eating any carbohydrates. There's no fluctuation of ups and downs all the time. My insulin levels stay pretty constant. I barely give myself insulin for meals, and my, the basal rate, which is the amount of insulin I kind of give myself throughout the day, drops significantly. And so that's kind of how, like, following his diet recommendations, even though I didn't know it was like ketogenic diet or ketosis at the time, that's when I kind of first came across it. And I did other things, since I didn't really understand all the nuance of it and everything back then. I strayed from it and then went back to it, and then I guess I was kind of reintroduced when I started, when I read um, Travis Christofferson's book, The Metabolic Theory of Cancer, and then, which was maybe 5-6 years ago or whenever that first came out. But that really solidified to me that, and it made sense with all the stuff I was looking at with the heart. That this heart attacks, and not necessarily heart disease in general, but heart attacks specifically, are a change in metabolism, just like cancer is a shift in metabolism in any cell in the body. Um, when that happens in the heart, we get a heart attack. When it happens elsewhere, we get cancer. And when it happens, um, and our pancreas is stressed, we get insulin resistance. We get diabetes. We even get type 3 diabetes in the brain. All these changes in metabolism, like, this is what our body's struggling with, is our reliance on carbohydrates. And there's other things that don't help, like the stress response and the high toxins we're exposed to, creating oxidative stress. Those things are definitely playing roles. But at its core, when you change this metabolism, bad things happen.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 20-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group, and you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them, and everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive, and it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com, and it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. It is amazing how so much of our actual health is connected back to metabolic health, and it's almost like shifting the model to reevaluate health from the root cause, and that really being our actual metabolic condition.
Yeah, and I think that we have examples of this. I mean, even in things that, um, even just like the burning of energy, we definitely find that there's more efficient and more cleaner forms of energy when we're making electricity and all these different things. I mean, I'm not an environmental scientist, but, like, we know that depending on which type of fuel source you use, you're going to get either more efficiency or less waste product or all these things. So why wouldn't it be true for the body? I've been really fascinated with how, when I was studying in medical school, like the different um, either metabolism types of metabolism in the body or structures in the body, that I start to see the same kind of structures we've built as far as, like, what humans have created through engineering and all these structures that we've built, but also how nature creates. It's like we're made of the same things, and the things we're recreating, as far as architectural and engineering standpoint, we could probably find somewhere in the body. So why wouldn't the burning of some substance to make energy be the same way? And eh, as above, so below, kind of thing. And so if we pay attention to that, just like if we pay attention to cleaner burning or more efficient burning gasoline in cars, we pay attention to that in our bodies, we're going to get a better result. And we've shown this over and over and over again, anecdotally, and I think in the research as well.
Yeah, tell me more about that as above, so below.
I just think it means more like, to me, like the big, um, like if we take the universe whatsoever, and how it's organized and structured, like in a physical standpoint, we could trace it down all the way to the tiniest um, molecules that we know, and it's structured the same way. Uh, and 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 this is not as familiar with, like, I'm not as familiar with like all the nuances of this, but that concept, and like when I read books about it, it just makes so much sense that our structure is basically just um, the same structure multiplied over on a bigger scale. When we look at something like as large as the universe or our galaxy or our planet, and we keep going down and down and down all the way to the little atoms that make up um, our bodies, they're structured the same way. And so when we think about everything in between, it's all kind of works the same way. So if I see, again, like if we want to burn energy in some way, um, doing it the most efficiently is what's going to get the best result for the production that energy is trying to create, or the metabolism of our body. And if we don't use a proper fuel, we don't get the best result, and lots of times it doesn't even work, or at least it works uh, for a shorter amount of time. The lifespan of that whatever we're using is shorter. So again, it makes sense human wise. If we're burning carbohydrates the whole life, we end up with these issues. But it all results from the fact that we're not evolved, or we didn't evolve burning carbohydrates predominantly. We retain the ability to, but we didn't evolve to do that day in and day out. And so, I think that if we wanted to have the strategic plan for the next, 40, 50 generations of humans, we could probably evolve to tolerate carbohydrates much better. But that's not going to happen. Like when you change um, something too quickly for a species um, to not have enough time to evolve to it, then you're going to get this evolutionary mismatch, and you're going to get issues. Just like if we were to take a polar bear and put it in Bermuda, like it's just not adapted for that environment, so it's not going to do well. It didn't. But if we did it gradually, and the polar bear slowly migrated, like over millennia, down to Bermuda, it would make the necessary changes through generations to have that adaptation. But talking about how quickly humans went from eating and burning a bunch of fat all the time to being reliant on the crops of agriculture, which is a very short time evolutionarily, then there's no way we could have adapted to that, to burning them predominantly. I don't know how I got on that.
No, I think that's fascinating. And I actually think that so many of our modern, Dr. Ben Beekman puts it as our plagues of prosperity, but so many of the issues that we deal with in our health system, but also just psychologically and with addiction and all of this, a lot of it is because of our fundamental makeup being kind of hijacked by this environment. Like you said, I love that analogy with the polar bear, but we're in this environment where our body is wired and set up to go after certain things. And I've been thinking a lot about dopamine lately, and how our body, how we get rewarded for certain things. And I think a lot of that comes from nutritional deficiencies and sort of being in this constant state of sugar burning.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, this is a great segue. So, uh, if we think about, because it's not just the carbohydrate burning and the lack of fatty acid metabolism that's a mismatch to us. I mean, if we look at the three things that cause a heart attack, um, one of those other ones is the imbalance in our stress response. So you talk about dopamine. And we're constantly looking at our social media, and we hear the dings and we hear the little notifications from our phones, and it's just like that little surge of dopamine. We get excited about it and we want to look, but we get that all day long, and it results in this state of almost like our heightened stress response all day long. Now, it's not a full-blown adrenaline stress response like you get when someone jumps out from behind the corner and scares you, and you get that surge of adrenaline. But it's like this chronic low grade turning off of our rest and digest relaxation state. And so if we have that all day long, plus, we have all these unnatural noises of civilization that never would have happened in nature. And so even though our brain is smart enough to turn off, a reaction to that, we just kind of walk by when someone honks their horn or whatever, our body is still having a physiological stress response to that. And then, like I mentioned before, having to be reliant on making money, this one thing that can get us all the resources we need is pretty stressful, which makes our jobs very stressful because we have to put up with a lot of crap, if that we may not like, in order to attain that money. But just constantly being worried about, am I going to get that promotion? Are my kids going to be okay? Am I going to pass this test? Like all these different things, all these unnatural stressors of modern day society. And that's created this imbalance in our stress response. And people would say, well, living life in the wild is pretty stressful. And it's like, yeah, it definitely was. But we would have had a more natural stress response. We would have only had stress responses when it was necessary. So when our life was actually threatened, or the life of our offspring was actually threatened, we would have a stress response to remove that threat, if we could. And and then as soon as that threat was gone, we would be back to our rest and digest state. And that's what Dr. Robert Sapolsky has shown in his work, studying animals in Africa, is that's the way other mammals have a stress response. It's immediately turned off, almost as if it didn't happen. But we had this higher level thinking that literally, I could see something bad happen to somebody else and fear that it was going to happen to me and stress out about it. Or something could happen to me very stressful, or I could just been stuck in traffic and I could be mad about it all day long. And we just kind of think our way into these stressful responses. And so that's just the mismatch between our higher level thinking brain and the current environment that we're in. And that's, driving all these. I mean, even if it's a surge of dopamine, which is kind of like this feel good thing, if we get that too often, then it can result in this kind of low grade, chronically stimulated distress response. And like I mentioned, when we have these imbalances, a and we have this downgrade of our rest and digest nervous system, then any stressful event could actually trigger the series of events that causes a heart attack if we have those imbalances. So it's more than just the mismatch of burning carbohydrates rather than fat. It's our whole way of life. But luckily, there's many things you could do to mitigate those imbalances.
So, what does your approach to keto and lifestyle look like? What are you kind of optimizing for personally?
Yeah. So personally, I'm pretty carnivore right now, because of my history of inflammatory autoimmune conditions. I had never, I mean, I was already pretty, keto and animal based, more paleo though for a long time. And when I found out, all the different potential triggers of different plant compounds and their relationship to autoimmunity. I mean, I had already eliminated lectins pretty much, from like grains and legumes and nightshades and things like that, and that had a huge impact on my blood sugars. And I couldn't tell you why. Really, I could speculate, but I couldn't tell you why exactly. But then I chose to eliminate all plant toxins and see what happened, because with this history of autoimmunity that I have, I've always had this very very low grade thyroid antibodies, meaning my body was kind of had the tendency to attack my thyroid, which makes sense because once you have one autoimmune disease, you kind of have a tendency to have others. You just have that. It's just the way my genes are set up. So I really try hard to remove all things that could stimulate that. And so currently, I'm for the last 5 months or so, I've removed all plant toxins to see what happens, and I'll probably test it at the six month mark and see what happens.
And how do you do your testing? What do you kind of look for? You speaking in terms of blood work?
Yeah. So I'm looking at thyroglobulin antibodies, and different immune markers, and markers of inflammation, which we're looking at C-reactive protein and other cytokines and things like that, like interleukin 6, interleukin 12, things like that. And then it's really interesting with me because I don't really know, as being a type 1 diabetic, when I look at insulin resistance. I mean, it says I'm not insulin resistant, but which is good, but I don't really know if the amount of insulin that I'm giving myself is is comparable to someone who's non type 1, not type 1 diabetic, Uh, I don't know if that quantity of insulin is comparable to what their pancreas would give them naturally. And I haven't been able to find, you know, anywhere that can give me a reliable um, information on that. So if somebody has some, I'd be more than happy to look at it. But yeah, so I do a lot of blood testing, but I'm also, testing my blood sugar throughout the day, um, and those types of things. But I also look for, um, I look at, the lipids and everything, but those don't mean as much to me, especially with the way that I'm eating. There's really no trouble with that. I'm really concerned about inflammation and any autoimmune type process. So um, one of the biggest things is that I'm no longer like, so I've always had an issue with cats as far as allergies. And before even testing, I've noticed that because, the way I changed my diet before made it so that I could tolerate them and it was fine because my wife and I have 3 cats. And but I would still, like, if they got close to me, or I pet them and then I would touch my eyes or something like that, it would still bother me. But at least I wasn't, constantly sneezing and breaking out in hives and things like I used to when I was a kid. Um, but now, since I've started carnivore, I have no issues at all. Like, it's really interesting. Like, if I would let them in the bedroom before I went to bed and then take them out, like, I would wake up and my nose would be like stuffed up and hard to breathe just because I was breathing in cat hair, I guess. Or like I said, if they got real close to my face or I touched my eyes or something like that after petting them, I would sneeze or have itchy eyes. But I have none of that since I started carnivore, um, which is really interesting to me. And so I'm curious to see how the blood work shows up, and what it is, because I had elevated IgE antibodies ever since we got the cats, which you can get that from a parasite or from an allergy. And so I'm really interested to see if that IgE antibody is completely gone or not.
I think that's fascinating. And do you keep specific macros percentages? Because of, I guess you probably have to be cautious in some ways with protein intake.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't really track the macros. I've just kind of found I've always been this way. I've never. I remember like learning when I got an insulin pump and when I was doing like insulin shots and everything, they tell you to track everything. I just got really good at knowing what my body could handle. Like I would memorize all the carbohydrates in certain foods when I was eating carbohydrates and how much insulin to give myself, and it was never really an issue for me. And so I've kind of done the same thing with that. I don't really track anything. I just know that if I eat this size of steak, I need to bolus a little bit. Whereas if I eat a higher fattier meal, I don't need to. If it's a little protein and higher fat, then I don't really need to. um, and it's just kind of, I know how things work, and I can always tell, based on that, because of how strict I make things and control what I eat and my basal rates and everything. If something does go awry, like a blood sugar does go too high, I know that it's probably something to do with like the site I have for my insulin pump, like it's not working well. I need to change it, or like the tubing has gotten clogged or something like that. Because I'm so structured in the other things that I do, I know that there was no change there, so it must be something else. But yeah, I've always been really good at just kind of knowing as long as I stick to that structure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds like you really know your body well. And, you obviously from measuring and you get all this feedback all the time, which is, one of the kind of cool aspects, I guess, of
Hmm.
having to rely on this health tech is you learn so much about your body's responsiveness to various inputs.
Yeah, and people have been trying to talk me into continuous glucose monitor for a long time, and I've never used them just because I don't really like things being hooked up to me, and I've already got a pump I have to have on me all the time. But I've never felt like I needed it. If I really felt like I did need it, then I probably would get it because I'm pretty serious about this. But I just never felt like I needed it because I've just been so in tune. That may change over time, but um, yeah, I like to be active, and I don't really like things being hooked up to me. So, um, yeah.
I understand. I'm curious what your thoughts are on leaky gut and gut permeability and that kind of connection with autoimmunity and carnivore and keto.
Yeah. I think that I actually wrote an interesting blog about this. Uh, I wrote a 5 part kind of a series about why an animal based diet and keto diet is best for heart disease and for heart attacks. And one of the aspects was the autonomic nervous system and balance part of it. I definitely touch on how when you're looking at things like grains and legumes and these things with high anti-nutrients, things that you don't want to eat when you're trying to be keto, um, they actually cause a disruptive environment in your gut. And so your gut is kind of like the sensory organ. So it's an external environment inside your body. It's sealed off all the way through. And so if we create, so your body is almost using that as a marker for what your external environment looks like. And if it becomes a hostile environment, then your body can be thrown into this chronic stress state. And there's actually research that shows that gut healing has an effect on your autonomic nervous system balance and stimulating your vagus nerve and creating that balance. So removing things from your diet that can create this hostile environment, which leaky gut is one of those things that can create. I mean, gluten is the research is pretty profound on how that causes leaky gut in everybody, not just people who are intolerant to it, but also um, all the different, the phytic acids and the lectins and the tannins and um, um, the nightshade vegetables, all these different plant toxins can cause this hostile environment, whether they're causing dysbiosis, which is a change in the bacteria in your gut, whether they're causing leaky gut, whether they're causing gut damage just to the lining of the gut. It's crazy, or they're producing like lipopolysaccharides and things that are just aggravating to the gut. Like if your gut's inflamed, you're going to have this probably a higher stress response because your body thinks you're in a hostile environment. And so when you remove those things, you get less of that and allows your body to heal. And then I think the other aspect of this is that when you're eating animal based, I think you tend to get, especially if you're paying attention to it, you tend to get more collagen protein, connective tissue protein, which is really important for repairing that lining. The collagen that can rebuild the lining of the gut is essential. And so you're getting that all the time too, because you're always going to be exposed to things, I think, that are going to cause leaky gut. Like glyphosate's a big one, which is the herbicide found in Roundup and is sprayed all over, all kinds of things. That's just in our environment. And so, having that collagen there to help repair the lining of the gut is super important. But yeah, if you look at what leaky gut does, is if like I said, your gut's sealed off and it's supposed to be your first line of defense against things. But if it's got holes in it, then things that aren't supposed to be in the bloodstream get leaked into the bloodstream. And so that could be, it could be a toxin, it could be a bacteria, it could be a food, a protein. It's supposed to be broken down into certain, aspects of it before it's taken into the bloodstream. But if it leaks in whole, I think that's how people develop food allergies. A big way that they do is that, some piece of food that wasn't supposed to be in there yet got in there, and then your body doesn't recognize that because it's supposed to be proteins and fats and carbohydrates and things. Then it'll attack that whole piece of food. And now every time you eat that food, you get a response to it because your body's made these antibodies to it. But the other thing is that certain bacteria or certain proteins in certain foods can leak into the gut, and then your body can attack those because it doesn't recognize those. And then it'll attack also, like once it has this attack system in place, it'll attack also um, other tissues that look similar to that. So just from the research I've seen, like nightshade vegetables are associated with the cartilage in joints, which is why nightshade vegetables have been associated with like arthritis and stuff. And like gluten is highly associated with thyroid. And studies show that removing gluten can help people with autoimmune thyroiditis. And then in my case, the protein casein found in milk um, has been linked to, it looks very similar to the beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. So it could have been that I had leaky gut and was drinking a lot of milk, which I was doing when I was a kid, and damaged milk protein at that because it was all pasteurized and that kind of stuff. Um, it could have looked just similar enough to the proteins of the beta cells that my body attacked the beta cells as well. Um, and I feel that if I had known now what I knew then, I probably could have reversed it. Can't say for sure, but I definitely could have tried. But now that the damage is done and it's been long enough, those cells are gone. And I don't know that I'll reverse it ever unless there's some technology or something. But yeah, leaky gut definitely plays a role in autoimmunity, as well as I think these plant toxins. And and I think that a keto carnivore approach is really beneficial to anybody with those autoimmune type things.
Is there anything you do in particular, like supplementing with collagen and things to really focus in on, enhancing that or reversing that gut permeability?
Yeah. So I don't do many supplements, but I do take collagen just because it's hard to get enough. I mean, I make bone broth and stuff, but I still want more, so I'll add collagen to the bone broth, or I'll sprinkle it on food occasionally because I do want that collagen. And then the only other two supplements, and I don't take them all the time, that I take are one is a probiotic, and I most probiotics are garbage. I think they're not really going to do much, but I came across this one that has actual clinical trials that showed that it decreased endotoxic bacteria, which are ones that can be irritating to the gut and create all these compounds we don't want in there that create this hostile environment. But it actually reduced it in this clinical trial, and so I thought I'd give it a try, and I actually saw a benefit. And so I do like a month of that every now and then. It's called Thrive Probiotic. And then the last thing is I do take another supplement, but it's not really a food. It's basically dirt. It's called Restore, and it's just these molecules in the dirt that have been shown to increase cellular communication and mitigate the damage from, say, like glyphosate. That's what they tested it against. And so they looked at the damage caused to cells and the communication between cells with glyphosate without the restore present and with it present, and it was able to mitigate the damage of that the glyphosate, the herbicide from Roundup. And so I will do every, I don't know, 3-4 months or so, I'll take restore to do that. Or sometimes I'll have some around because um, and if I like go on vacation and I'm not able to eat exactly as I want to, I can take some of that with it, and I feel that it mitigates some of the damage that the food that I was eating may cause. So those are my three kind of go tos. But you really, with the way that I eat and the bioavailability of the food that I do eat, I don't feel it's necessary to supplement. When you remove all, lots of toxins that interfere with absorption, then you end up absorbing, the highly bioavailable animal sources of food much more readily. And so, plus, I don't really know that, especially all these synthetic vitamins and minerals out there. Um, I, I've always been a believer that you can't take a mineral or a vitamin or a nutrient out of a food and expect it to do the same thing it would if it came in the food, because they all work synergistically. So we can get, all these multivitamins with these RDAs, but I don't know that they're working the same way they would if we got them packaged in a food. So I'm not sometimes I'd recommend specific vitamins and minerals to help someone get through something, or heal a little quicker or something like that. But long term, once they've hit a certain point, I don't think that it's best to be taking those things all the time.
Yeah, I agree, and I really believe that, the best multivitamin we can possibly get is from organ meats. Do you actively supplement or not supplement, but
Yeah.
incorporate offal?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm probably gonna go eat some liver after we're done here. But yeah, and people who can't, stomach it or whatever, they can supplement those like the desiccated forms, definitely, because they're just so nutrient dense. I mean, that's nature's multivitamin. So it's just a great way to boost your nutrient metabolism or nutrient intake. And yeah, I'm definitely a fan of organ meats. And I do this liverwurst stuff from U.S. Wellness Meats, which has some spices in it, but if it's going to allow me to get to the kidney and the heart and things like that in, then I let that slide.
I love their liverwurst. It's so good. It's
I
really
know.
good. Really yummy. That's awesome. Well, I'm curious as we kind of close things off here, but what would you say to someone who said to you, oh, ketosis or being in ketogenesis is a dangerous state, for the body, and we really can't be in it for too long. It's acidic, it does all these things.
Well, when I look at things, I can look at research all day long, and I can see that research, to me, is very interesting to learn from. But what we see is the highest form of research, which is a randomized clinical trial. I think is fundamentally flawed because trying to isolate all the variables and just look at one thing is not really looking at how life happens, because when am I ever exposed to just one thing? So it's really impossible um, to really see if something causes a certain symptom or a certain process or disease process or an effect in a human, because there's so many other variables. And so to me, I have to look back at evolution. That's what really gave me the answers, which is why the book that I wrote is called The Health Evolution. And because when you look at how evolution works and you look at what humans have been through and what the process that made us human, you realize that we were very likely in ketosis um, the majority of the year. And yeah, sometimes we came across fruit in the summer, or maybe we dug up roots or things like that and took us out of ketosis sometimes. But I mean, there's studies out there that show that you know our um, the composition of our bones. That would, I think it's the nitrogen content of our bones. I can't remember exactly, which tells us how much animal protein and uh, an animal was eating. Back when we were evolving to what we are today, it's higher than other carnivores. So we were eating, very carnivorously and in ketosis. And so the problem is we've just gotten so far away from that we don't even think that that's normal, that that's weird. And in the time that we've been doing this research, this very uh, narrowed down research to try and isolate these different variables, we've been doing it running on carbohydrates, because that's for the last especially 300-400 years we've been running on carbohydrates. So we've been kind of doing this research out of the context of what our natural diet is, in my opinion. So how can we really tell? um, I think that you can look at all the research and go back and forth about it and try and understand the complexities of physiology, but Theodosius Dozonsky said, nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. So when I look back at evolution, it gives me the answer that it makes sense of the health benefits we see long term in humans when they are in ketosis.
I couldn't agree more. So well said. Well, it's been really fascinating hearing your take on some of these things, and I know it's going to spark interest in things for people that they will want to learn more about. So, where can people follow you, and what can we look out for next from you?
Yeah, so my website is resourceyourhealth.com. And there's a link to my books and some products I recommend, and my blog is on there. And also that's where I run my health coaching through. And then I have two books. One's called The Health Evolution: Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Vibrant Health. The other is a smaller ebook called The Heart, Our Most Medically Misunderstood Organ, which are on Amazon, but also on my website. And I'm on social media, mostly on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. And I'm always posting stuff on there, try and keep people entertained. And I'm hoping to do a new blog series here pretty soon. And then I'm also working on an unabridged, non-ebook form of a heart book about all the things I've found about the heart and my take on that. But it may be a while before that comes out. So, but yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Some things need to take their time and not be rushed,
Yeah,
especially
definitely.
important work like that. So I really appreciate all that you're doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come here today and share some of your thoughts with us. And I'm sure everyone will be looking forward for more from you.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here and for tuning in to the episode today. I loved having Dr. Hussey on, and I love exploring this idea of ketones and how heart health can be really supportive with a ketogenic diet and how much the heart loves ketones. I've heard this from now a couple of scientists out there who have theories on this, and I think it is such an interesting topic to explore. So if you know of anyone who'd be interested in the topic, be sure to share the episode with them. And if what I do provides value for you, please leave me a rating or review. It helps me to create more content and devote more of my time to bringing you episodes all about keto so we can geek out together. And I really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you're interested in trying keto with me as your coach, I have private coaching packages available at ketogenicgirl.com. I haven't had these available for a few years because I've been really busy with school and studying, and I still am completing my program in biomedical science, but I have brought back the private coaching packages if you're interested in doing some private coaching. If you would like to do group coaching with me, I always have the Ketogenic Girl Challenge available. And you can join that, get my meal plans, and join our Facebook group where I do all of the coaching for anyone who joins the group there. And you can ask any questions that you have about keto. If you would like more personalized attention and me looking through your actual food intake and activity levels and doing some personalized macro calculations and things, please take a look at the private coaching options at ketogenicgirl.com, or take a look at the Ketogenic Girl Challenge because it's a really fun group to be a part of, and you also get my coaching and support as a part of that. So check those out at ketogenicgirl.com. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I love you guys, and until the next episode, I'm wishing you a fat-fueled rest of your day and week. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.